Oh my goodness, finally. So in AMD's latest driver update, 25.9.1, in addition to Borderlands 4 support and Hell is S support, we are finally getting a whole bunch more games whitelisted for FSR 4 support. So now the vast majority of games that have an FSR 3.1 implementation, which is required in order to do the driver level upgrade to FSR 4, at least the ones that have DirectX 12, so for example, games that only have Vulkan support like Doom the Dark Ages, there's still no FSR 4 support for Vulkan. So anyway, but now the vast majority of games with FSR 3.1 support do now have FSR 4 whitelisted in the driver, which is fantastic. But let's talk about, so where is AMD right now with FSR, and have they caught up to DLSS? If not, what steps need to be taken? Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the game support list. So this is now the FSR 4 supported game list, and there's 85 games on here. It is quite a few. But overall, what I'm really looking for is a couple of things. Number one, I think that FSR 4 has done a great job of catching up mostly to the image quality of DLSS. So the basic upscaling part of FSR 4 really is where it needs to be. You turn it on, the game still looks almost as good as native, sometimes better than native TAA. So it's extremely usable, your performance increases, that's where it needed to be. It's better than DLSS 3 upscaling, and it's almost as good as DLSS 4 upscaling, and it's extremely usable. So from an image quality standpoint, great. However, here's the thing. When pretty much any new game launches, I expect DLSS support to be there, and it generally is. That has not been my experience with FSR 4. Oftentimes games have FSR, but it's not always whitelisted. For example, while I didn't benchmark Chronos: The New Dawn on launch day, because honestly, I just got kind of busy, didn't really have time to make a video about it. But I did play it on launch day on my RX 9070 XT, and there was no FSR 4 driver toggle available. Now, it's only a couple of days later, and we're now getting this driver that whitelists that, but that's kind of having that experience of a new game launches, and I want to use FSR 4, and I can't, is a problem, because that's been happening on a fairly regular basis. And again, that's a problem. So right now, this whole situation where FSR 3.1 can be upgraded in the driver, but you need a driver whitelisting process to happen from AMD, I don't think this is good enough. So this big update to now get these like 85 games, obviously a lot of these already had it, but to get a bunch more games whitelisted, what I would really like to see from AMD is the option in the driver to just toggle FSR 4 on any FSR 3.1 game, regardless of whether they've whitelisted it. If it's a game that isn't whitelisted, they should probably just have a warning pop up and just say that, AMD hasn't whitelisted this game yet, use at your own risk. So if there's any crashing or image quality issues, you just have to deal with that. But again, this waiting for the driver toggle has been really frustrating because, like I said, Chronos: The New Dawn, trying to play it on launch day on my 9070 XT, couldn't kick on the FSR 4 support. Cyberpunk 2077 got an FSR 4 patch, and I had to wait weeks for the official drivers to actually allow it to be enabled. So anyway, that's kind of my point, is that experience needs to change. Hopefully, with the introduction of AMD's FSR 4 SDK, now hopefully more games will actually just have a native implementation of FSR 4 that works on day one. Anyway, so I think that this is overall a good thing that we've got a bunch more games whitelisted, but I want that process to just not really be needed. If again, give me the toggle option in the driver without needing the whitelist, and or have the whitelist available in a driver update when games launch, not after they launch. That's what I'm looking for to get more of that feeling of feature parity with DLSS. Now, speaking of that though, we're still not quite at feature parity with the entire DLSS package. So where are we at with that right now. So FSR Redstone is AMD's project name for trying to catch up to the rest of the DLSS branded features. Now, honestly, it's kind of confusing that DLSS and FSR have actually many technologies that are by no means the same thing underneath the same branding label. So everything I've been talking about previously is talking about DLSS and FSR upscaling, rendering a game at a lower resolution and outputting an image that is, reconstructed to try to look at the monitor's native resolution, and thereby increasing performance with little to no loss in image quality. However, beneath these technologies are underneath the same branding is some other technologies, like frame generation, which is its own completely different thing. But then also, Nvidia has DLSS ray reconstruction, which is also a different thing. And so in general, AMD's Project Redstone is designed to really try to get into that full feature set parity with Nvidia. And in the process, it seems like the goal is to have path tracing be something where AMD is kind of no longer behind. Now, whether or not they end up matching NVIDIA's performance in the NVIDIA-sponsored and optimized path tracing titles we currently have out there, like Black Myth Wukong, Cyberpunk 2077, games like that, or maybe they'll do their own game sponsorships, or maybe as games start to target path tracing on like the PlayStation 6, which is using AMD hardware. Maybe that's what this is targeting. We'll have to see. But in general, the feature set they're looking at here is path tracing is still incredibly demanding. So one thing is using a machine learning model for neural radiance caching to continually learn how light bounces in a scene to predict and store indirect lighting, which again, NVIDIA has already been doing in their path tracing implementations, and then use something that sounds like NVIDIA's ray reconstruction, which they're saying is machine learning ray regeneration, using a neural trained model on noisy, low sampled renders and predicting and filtering grainy noise in real time. That's their ray regeneration. Again, sounds like ray reconstruction, which when NVIDIA moved ray reconstruction over to a transformer model, really made huge image quality differences in games like Cyberpunk 2077's path tracing mode and things like that. But again, we currently still don't have these technologies. All we have right now is their machine learning super resolution technology. That's the FSR4 we've been talking about, and it is looking good. And then there's also frame generation. AMD does have frame generation right now, introduced with FSR3, but that's more of like an analytical approach. It's not using a machine learning approach, and AMD has promised a machine learning-based frame generation technique, which I guess the advantage there would be hopefully better image quality. Honestly, what I would like is better frame pacing. I don't always feel like FSR frame generation has as good of frame pacing as I feel like I'm getting from the NVIDIA frame generation option. Anyway, so these other technologies are still needed. Now, where are we at with them? Well, AMD has promised them for the second half of 2025, and there is a recent article confirming that they are still on track for that. So we're seeing FSR Redstone on track. AMD promises dedicated presentation. I found this in a videocards.com article from September 7th. However, they are gathering this information from an interview with Computer Base, where AMD specifically said the new FSR Redstone is on schedule. AMD explained in response to a query, it is scheduled to be released this half year. As mentioned at the beginning, there will be a separate presentation for that. So it sounds like AMD is planning a dedicated presentation for FSR Redstone when it's ready to show off. I'm really hopeful that the other technologies that we don't have yet are as high quality as we got from their super resolution. Honestly, I had doubted that FSR4 would look as good as it does. I had thought maybe it would be almost as good as DLSS 3 upscaling, and in fact, it's actually better in most situations and almost as good as DLSS 4. I don't know what to make of these other options. Hopefully, they also just deliver in the same way that they did for for the FSR4 upscaling. Now, a huge part of this, and a reason why I think this might actually be successful, is that this seems to be a huge push for the next generation of PlayStation. PlayStation 6, when you listen to Mark Cerny talk about that, he's talking all about neural rendering, ray tracing improvements, machine learning, everything. So, and they have a research partnership. AMD and PlayStation are entered into Project Amethyst, where you combine AMD's Red and PlayStation's Blue into Project Amethyst, where they're partnering on the research and development for all of these technologies, which is absolutely huge. And again, it seems like PlayStation is betting the house on all of this for the PlayStation 6. Now, in kind of a related note, there's been a lot of questions about FSR4 coming to PlayStation 5, at least the PlayStation 5 Pro, which currently uses PSSR, which when you look at image quality analysis from places like Digital Foundry that cover such things, PSSR has been a bit of a letdown. But in their work to get FSR4 running on hardware like the PlayStation 5 Pro, it's also possible that work is being done to try to get it running on older AMD GPUs. Whether or not it'll be the same full FSR4 version, whether or not it'll be as fast, so get as much performance gains, I don't know, but there's heavy rumors and some actual hard evidence that AMD is at least exploring the option of getting FSR4 onto older like RDNA 3 hardware. And again, on Linux, you can already get it up and running through things like Optiscaler, and the question is really, is the performance there? Now, I found this WCCF Tech article discussing this timeline of PlayStation 5 Pro getting AMD FSR4 support in the first quarter of 2026, but it seems like their source for that information is Moore's Law is dead. Now, he's a well-known leaker, has got many things correct, especially recently about PlayStation-specific leaks, but not everything he has leaked in the past has come to pass. So as always, take leaks and rumors with a grain of salt, make of it what you will. But along with this discussion of FSR4 coming to PlayStation 5 Pro, he has also mentioned that this could be with or shortly after support for RDNA 3 GPUs with FSR4, which he says may come as early as the final months of 2025. So in other words, there's some question about, is it possible that whenever we get this toward the end of 2025, if things continue to maintain their schedule, maybe the Redstone announcement could also include an update to machine learning super resolution, FSR4, maybe support for older hardware, maybe support for PlayStation. It'll be really interesting to see what comes of all of this. Now, while we're on it, how about a little bit more AMD news? One is that AMD has been asked if they would, if they're planning on any kind of competitor to Nvidia's Geforce Now, which, by the way, in related news, Nvidia's Geforce Now on September 10th, which is tomorrow as of the time of filming, is getting an RTX 5080 upgrade, meaning that you can now get even more performance in their stream games. And if you're unaware of what Geforce Now is, this is streaming games from powerful hardware in the cloud. Now, I haven't tried this in its later versions, and the more I've looked into this, the more maybe I should perhaps do a review of it, because in the past, I've been pretty dismissive of game streaming for a high-end option. But I've been being told and seen some reviews that NVIDIA's streaming tech is getting extremely interesting on this. So this is moving into, there's a lot of options here. So apparently this 5080 tier will support up to 5K resolutions at 60 FPS and 120 FPS, or 1440p at 240 FPS, and 1080p at 360 FPS. Again, including like kicking on all the ray tracing and neural rendering and frame generation, etc. And I've also seen that they are supporting variable refresh rate now. So like you can have your G-Sync monitor working properly. So a lot of my big hangups on this technology are are improving, because when game streaming was just like 60 FPS at 1080p with pretty bad image quality and a lot of latency and no variable refresh rate support, that was one thing. But one thing about streaming, though, that you're never going to completely solve is the latency when compared with playing on a local PC. But one thing that can help with latency is just running at crazy high frame rates. So because that just reduces the actual input latency on the PC it's running on, which again, if you run at that same frame rate locally, would obviously still be more responsive. And of course, there's always limits on your internet connection and what is your physical distance to a server. So I still don't think that game streaming is ever going to be the right solution for everybody. But it sounds like, Geforce Now has really made big improvements in image quality, frame rate, variable refresh rate support. So I might need to take another look at this and see what I make of it. But the point is, AMD has been asked, are they thinking about a Radeon Now competitor to Geforce Now? And their answer was no, because they feel like they're already competing in the streaming space with things like, for example, like Xbox's streaming service, because they use AMD hardware when doing that. So I guess they feel like their hardware, at least, and their hardware company is already in that space. They don't feel like running their own service. They've also been pushed on their Ryzen Z2 series naming scheme because it seems to have gone back on, they had recently set up a new naming scheme for their processors to try to make it clear which actual generation of hardware was inside of it. And it seems like they went back on that with the Z2 family, which has Zen 2, Zen 3, Zen 4, Zen 5, RDNA 2, RDNA 3, and RDNA 3.5 technologies inside of it. And AMD has admitted the overlap is confusing, but the company sees the problem not the same way the press does. Computer-based reports that the company deflected by pointing to Intel, which is currently selling 3 architectures at once. In other words, there was some admission that, yes, this is confusing, but hey, other people do confusing stuff too, so there. Okay. Anyway. Now, in other AMD CPU-related news, we do have some potentially weirdness going on with the information on the Ryzen 5 9500F. Now, the F indicates that this has no integrated graphics, and the 9500 is indicating it's a little bit of a cut-down version of the 9600, and again, also doesn't have the integrated graphics. Now, we had already seen talks about this launching or potentially already having launched in China, and that this 9500F was going to be a China exclusive. However, now we're seeing some English language slides discussing a September 16th release date, which may indicate a wider launch. Now, you can follow this videocards.com source in the video description, where they've tried to follow up on certain product codes, because it's possible that the product code that's being released in China is different than the one that's being released globally. And so maybe that is still going to happen. Now, I'm interested if this actually did get a global launch and was enough of a price cut compared to like a 9600 or 9600X, could potentially be interesting. And they are claiming it's, around 10% faster, 9 to 11% faster than the previous generation 7500F, which in regions that have it could offer some pretty good value. Now, my issue has always been the United States region. I just don't see these at major retailers. So a lot of times when I do my PC builds, best value PC build, people are like, why don't you have the 7500F? Because it's not available from major retailers in the United States. Anyway, so it'd be cool if this got a global launch, had good pricing, and was a good value choice. Now, last bit of AMD news here is that Dr. Lisa Su, chair and CEO of AMD, will keynote the CES 2026 presentation in January. It's on how AI is changing the world. Now, there's no specific note here about, announcing new, gaming products or anything like that. Now, that doesn't mean that, there couldn't be anything related to that there, but the keynote will be 6:30 p.m. on Monday, January 5th. So, yeah, we'll have to follow that, see what comes of it. Now, in their competitors' news with Intel, There is continuing to be more signs that we might have an Intel Arc B770, so a higher-end Intel Arc GPU, incoming soon-ish without specific dates. This article headlining Intel reportedly preparing packaging for upcoming Arc B770 GPUs is really citing the source of Hayes on Twitter, mentioning that packaging for Intel's next GPU is being made. Now, we've got follow-ups from Raw Mango pointing out that the last time we saw packaging information for the B580, it was about 2.5 months out before the launch. So, hey, if we're in September now, you've got like your October, November, you're getting into that holiday release window, Black Friday stuff. You know, maybe Intel is targeting a holiday 2025 B770 launch. It could certainly be interesting. The rumored specs are that it would be a 32Xe2 core variant, as opposed to the B580, which is 20, and the B570, which is 18, and it would be a 16 gigabyte VRAM capacity as opposed to the 12 gigabyte B580, and it would be on a 256-bit bus as opposed to the 192-bit bus on the B580. So potentially this could be a lot more powerful than a B580. My main hang-up on this is the more powerful the GPU is, the closer to your CPU limitations you can get. And right now, that's a bit of a sticking point for Intel's Arc GPUs because testing is still showing that there's additional CPU-related driver overhead on Intel GPUs when compared to AMD and Nvidia. And for that matter, AMD usually has less driver overhead on the CPU than Nvidia does. But this would kind of put Intel into the worst position in that situation. So the weaker a GPU is, not that the B580 and B570 are like super weak, but they're also not super high end. They're more entry level into the current generation, performance and price range. Then it's possible that if you're on a modern CPU platform that you're more likely to be GPU limited than CPU limited, so you might not experience those driver overhead related issues. However, the more powerful the GPU gets, like I said, the faster your GPU is running, the more likely you can be to run into CPU limitation. And so I don't know. That's my main hang up on if this comes out. I'll want to see how these perform on reasonable lower or mid-range CPUs when compared with their AMD and Nvidia counterparts. Also, what's the price going to be? Because if it's an aggressive enough price, it might still be an attractive option. Now, Intel overall has been in a lot of trouble recently. Not the greatest financial situation. They're making a lot of changes, a lot of layoffs, and they're changing a whole bunch of key leadership positions at the company. Including a new lead for the data center group, and then probably more interesting for the gaming PC situation, new head of the client computing group being Jim Johnson. Now, he's not new to the company. He has apparently been a 40-year Intel veteran and has had leadership across all sorts of parts of the company, etc. So anyway, just noting that there is still a bunch of changes and shakeups happening at Intel. I'm just hoping that the whole Intel Arc situation, they keep going. Don't give up. Keep your head in the game. It's worth it. It's a long road. They've come a long way. Keep going, please. More competition in the GPU space is so desperately needed. It's only a good thing. So anyway, hope they hang in there. Let's do a couple more quick stories here. We do have Lenovo. Sorry, I think my kids are home, so you might hear some yelling in the background and stomping and whatnot. We'll wrap up the video here pretty quick. They just got home from school. Anyway, Lenovo defends Legion Go 2's high price, saying the product is aimed at enthusiasts who are willing to invest. So we've seen a whole variety of PC handhelds, and the Steam Deck seem to have really, obviously they weren't the first, but they really seem to have popularized the genre of hardware. But one thing that the Steam Deck has really done is target being extremely affordable. That being said, though, like performance-wise and hardware spec-wise, it's no longer at the top end. So what Lenovo's really saying here is, they're targeting enthusiasts who are willing to pay for the higher-end hardware, and they just want higher-end hardware if it's available, and aren't so concerned about what it costs. And it's certainly true. We see in the GPU space, there's a lot of people who buy something like a 5090. The finances work for them. They just want the best. Whereas there's a lot more people who are worried about the budget segment. Well, not necessarily budget segment, but the budget. And don't necessarily buy the most expensive, most powerful thing out here. So anyway, they also mentioned that they do have the Legion Go S series, which is available at a lower price, and there is even a Steam OS model. So anyway, it's just interesting to follow this PC handheld space, because one thing I'm always wondering at the back of my mind is, like, how big is this market? Because there's so many of these launching. I'm assuming these must be profitable for companies, or they wouldn't be doing them. Anyway, I'm fine with there being more and more choice out there on them. Now, another quick story. I never reported on the reports of an RTX 5090 modded to have 128 gigabytes of memory, but there were a lot of places that did report on this, so if you heard about that, it's looking like there is a follow-up to clarify that this is some kind of a prototype GDDR7X VRAM thing. So everyone pay attention. It's just a prototype, not the closest to anything on the market. It's intended to be the engineering sample version that's somewhat somewhat similar to the Titan Ada version that everyone has seen before, etc. In other words, like, this is, people were like, how would you even if you were clamshelling the memory, that doesn't get you to 128, and even if you use the 3 gigabyte modules, it doesn't get you to 128. So really, it's not really a 5090 with 128 gigabytes, guys. Anyway, now I do want to mention this. So we have leaks, and again, who knows if they're going to end up being completely accurate, etc., that the PlayStation 6 is still planned to have a detachable disk drive on launch, and to have a model available that bundles the disk drive with it. There's been a lot of fear that the next generation of console could be just the death of physical media. What if they just don't have a disk drive version? Now, in the PC space, we're pretty used to not having physical versions of games, and most PCs now don't even have, a disk drive if you wanted them to. Obviously you can buy one and attach it or whatever, but the point is, pretty uncommon now. Whereas in the console space, one nice thing about consoles is that you can buy a game and then you can sell it. And once you lose that, there's, one more of the value-oriented arguments for console gaming starts to diminish. So it's looking like PlayStation 6 is still planning on having a disk drive available. Now, if they end up having the main version not have it, and it's just an attachable option that's expensive, they might try to slowly kill that market without the negative press of actually killing the option. So we'll have to see, and at what point do stores stop really even stocking the physical media? You kind of have to feel like this is eventually on its way out. But if the rumors are true, not completely out for the PlayStation 6 launch. Last thing I want to mention here is, I cover PC system requirements on the channel. There are now official system requirements for Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, but they're the kind of minimum and recommended with no graphic settings or frame rate targets listed kind, so there's not really a whole lot to say about it. So I'm not going to do a separate video, but the minimum GPU is a GTX 1060. The minimum CPUs are an i3-8350K or Ryzen 3 3300X. So in general, they're not asking for a whole lot from the GPU space. An AMD RX 480 would also be good enough. Intel Arc A580. The recommended specs jumping up more noticeably, though, I would say more to be in line with something like a current gen console. I'm not saying exactly, but actually a little bit above. With Intel Core i5-12600K, AMD Ryzen 5 5600X, 16 gigabytes of RAM, RTX 3060 Ti, or RX 6700 XT. Anyway, we don't know what sort of resolution and frame rates those are targeting, so make of it what you will. But again, the minimum specs, at least with the GTX 1066 gigabyte being, that came out in 2016. We are getting very close to a decade old, so not asking for a whole lot there, at least on the minimum spec. Anyway, hope you guys found today's video useful and or interesting. Stay tuned to the channel for GPU news, benchmarks, game benchmarks, all of that. Huge thank you to viewers, subscribers, channel members, and yeah, channel members who click the join button down below to directly support financially. That is absolutely huge. Totally understand not everybody's in a position to do that, which is fine. Anyway, you're all beautiful people, and I hope you have an excellent day.